The banker's notice arrived on a Tuesday morning in September 1882, and Sophia Oakley read it 3 times before the words finally registered through her shock. Immediate repayment of $1,200 or foreclosure on her late father's mercantile store within 30 days. Her hands trembled as she stood behind the counter of Oakley General Store in Mineral Point, Wisconsin, the autumn sunlight streaming through the front windows and illuminating dust motes that danced in the air like tiny spirits mocking her confusion. She had never taken out a loan. Her father, Samuel Oakley, had died 6 months ago from pneumonia, leaving her the store free and clear, or so she had believed. The document before her bore an official stamp from Mineral Point Savings and Loan, dated 2 months before her father's death, with a signature that supposedly belonged to her. "This cannot be right," she whispered to the empty store, her voice cracking with the weight of disbelief and rising panic. The bell above the door chimed, and she quickly folded the notice, tucking it beneath the counter as Mrs. Henderson entered with her usual shopping basket. Sophia forced a smile and helped the older woman select fabric for a new dress, measuring and cutting the material with hands that wanted to shake, but she willed to steadiness. She had built her life on being reliable, on maintaining the trust her father had established over 20 years in this mining town. She would not crumble now, even as the foundation of everything she knew threatened to collapse beneath her feet. After Mrs. Henderson left, Sophia locked the front door and turned the sign to closed, though it was barely past noon. She retrieved the notice and studied every detail with the intensity of someone searching for a lifeline in turbulent waters. The signature looked nothing like her handwriting. The loops were too wide, the slant too aggressive, the flourish on the final letter entirely wrong. Someone had forged her name, but who and why remained mysteries that made her stomach twist with anxiety and anger in equal measure. She needed help, but in a town where the banker held considerable influence, speaking openly could destroy what remained of her reputation before she had a chance to prove her innocence. The mining community of Mineral Point was tight-knit, built on trust and handshake deals, and a defaulted loan would mark her as unreliable, dishonest, unworthy of the respect her father had earned through decades of fair dealing. Sophia thought of Sheriff Morrison, but he played cards with the bank manager every Friday night. She considered the town lawyer, but he handled most of the bank's legal matters. The web of connections in a small town suddenly felt like a trap closing around her, each potential ally already entangled with the institution accusing her of debt she had never incurred. The bell chimed again despite the closed sign, and she looked up to see a tall man in dusty traveling clothes pushing through the door with the confidence of someone accustomed to going where he pleased. He had dark hair that needed cutting, sharp blue eyes that seemed to take in everything at once, and the weathered look of someone who spent more time under open sky than beneath a roof. "Store's closed," she said, trying to keep the frustration from her voice. "Door was unlocked," he replied, his voice carrying a slight drawl that spoke of places farther south. "I am looking for traveling supplies, heading west tomorrow, and I need provisions." Sophia almost told him to come back later, but the practical part of her mind that her father had trained over years of retail work reminded her that she needed every sale she could get, especially now. She moved behind the counter and gestured for him to look around. "What do you need?" He moved through the store with practiced efficiency, selecting dried beef, hardtack, coffee, and ammunition for what she noted was a well-maintained Colt revolver on his hip. As she tallied his purchases, he studied her with an intensity that made her self-conscious. "You look like someone just delivered bad news, sure," he said bluntly. She met his gaze, startled by his directness. "That is not your concern." "Fair enough." He counted out coins for his supplies, then paused. "Name is Jackson Ellis. Used to do investigative work for the railroad before I decided I preferred my own schedule. If that bad news involves someone cheating you, I'm good at finding out who and why." Sophia's breath caught. She did not know this man, had no reason to trust him, but something in his steady gaze and straightforward manner made her want to believe he was exactly what he claimed. Or perhaps she was simply desperate enough to grasp at any possibility of help. "Why would you help me?" she asked carefully. Jackson shrugged, collecting his purchases into a canvas bag. Maybe I'm tired of seeing people get pushed around by folks who think power means they can do whatever they want. Maybe I just do not like injustice. Does the reason matter if the help is real? She pulled out the notice and spread it on the counter between them, watching his face as he read. His expression remained neutral, but she saw his jaw tighten slightly when he reached the signature line. "You did not sign this," he said, and it was not a question. "No, I never took out any loan. I did not even know it existed until this morning." Jackson picked up the paper, holding it to the light streaming through the window, examining it from multiple angles. "The paper stock is right for bank documents, and the stamp looks legitimate. Whoever did this had access to official materials, which means someone inside the bank or someone with connections there." Hope fluttered in Sophia's chest, fragile as a bird with a broken wing. "Can you prove it?" "I can try." He set the paper down and looked at her directly. "But if I start asking questions, whoever did this will know someone is investigating. Could get uncomfortable for you." "It is already uncomfortable," she said with more heat than she intended. "They want to take everything my father built, everything I have left of him. I will not let that happen without a fight." Something shifted in Jackson's expression, a warmth that softened the hard edges of his weathered face. "Then I guess I'm not heading west tomorrow after all. Let me ask you something. Did anyone else have access to bank documents around the time this loan was supposedly created?" Sophia thought back to February, trying to remember anything unusual. Her father had been sick, but still working reduced hours. She had been managing most of the store's operations. The bank sent someone to the store around that time. Said they were updating records for all the local businesses. A clerk named Thomas Ward. He had papers for my father to sign regarding the store's account. "Did your father sign anything?" "Yes, but it was just confirmation of our existing account. I saw the papers. They were routine banking documents." Jackson's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. "Did this Thomas Ward take the papers with him after your father signed?" "Yes. He said he needed to file them at the bank." Sophia felt cold realization wash over her. "You think he added pages? Used my father's signature as a template?" "It is a possibility. Someone skilled in forgery could study your father's signature and practice yours if they had access to any documents you had signed. Banking records would have both." Jackson folded the loan notice carefully. "I need to see the bank's records, compare signatures, check dates and witnesses. Problem is, they will not just let me walk in and start examining their files. What do we do then? We go in the front door and demand answers. You have every right to question a loan you claim you did not take. Let us see how they react when pressed and watch who gets nervous." The next morning, Sophia dressed in her best dark blue dress with the proper bustle and matching jacket, pinning her auburn hair into a severe bun that she hoped conveyed serious intent. Jackson met her outside the bank at 9 o'clock sharp. Having somehow acquired a clean shirt and pressed vest that made him look more respectable than his travel-worn appearance of the previous day. The Mineral Point Savings and Loan occupied a brick building on High Street, its facade designed to project stability and trustworthiness. Inside, the air smelled of paper and leather, and a young clerk looked up from his desk with a professional smile that faltered slightly when he saw Sophia's determined expression. "I need to speak with Manager Whitmore," she said firmly, "regarding the loan notice I received yesterday." The clerk's smile disappeared entirely. "Mr. Whitmore is quite busy this morning. Perhaps I can help you arrange a payment schedule?" "I am not here to arrange payment for a loan I never took," Sophia said, loud enough that several other customers turned to look. "I am here to dispute a fraudulent document, and I will speak with the manager now." The clerk's face reddened. "Miss Oakley, please lower your voice. These are serious accusations." "They are serious accusations against me," she countered, "based on what I believe to be a forged signature. Now, will you get Mr. Whitmore, or shall I simply walk back to his office myself?" A door at the rear of the bank opened, and a portly man in an expensive suit emerged, his mustache bristling with irritation. "Miss Oakley, what is the meaning of this disruption?" "The meaning, Mr. Whitmore, is that I never signed any loan document, never received any loan money, and I want to see the original paperwork immediately." Whitmore's expression cycled through several emotions: surprise, calculation, and finally condescension. "My dear young woman, I understand that losing your father has been difficult, but debt does not disappear simply because you do not wish to acknowledge it. The loan was properly documented and witnessed." "Then show me the documentation," Jackson said quietly, speaking for the first time. "And the witness statements. If everything is legitimate, you should have no problem providing proof." Whitmore's attention shifted to Jackson, and his eyes narrowed. "And who might you be?" "Jackson Ellis. I am helping Miss Oakley investigate what appears to be a case of forgery and fraud." "This is a private banking matter," Whitmore sputtered. "I do not have to show you anything." "Actually, Wisconsin law requires that a debtor be provided with copies of all loan documentation upon request," Jackson said calmly. "And if this matter ends up in court, a judge will certainly want to see the original documents. We can do this the easy way now, or the complicated way later. Your choice." Sophia watched the color rise in Whitmore's face, saw his fingers clench at his sides. He was angry, but more than that, he was worried. She could see it in the way his eyes darted to the clerk, then to a closed door marked Records, then back to Jackson. "Very well," Whitmore said tightly. "But I warn you, questioning the integrity of this institution will have consequences for your reputation, Miss Oakley." "My reputation can withstand truth," she replied. "Can yours?" They were led to a small office where Whitmore produced a file folder. Inside was a loan application bearing Sophia's forged signature, a promissory note, and a disbursement record indicating the money had been paid in cash directly to her. There was also a witness signature from Thomas Ward. Sophia studied the signature carefully. It resembled her handwriting but lacked the subtle details that made it truly hers. The capital S had a loop she never made. The final Y descended at the wrong angle. To someone not familiar with her writing, it might pass inspection, but to her eyes it was clearly false. "This is not my signature," she said firmly. "Look at it. The formation is wrong." "You seem quite certain for someone who might simply have forgotten," Whitmore said dismissively. "Perhaps in your grief after your father's illness you do not recall the transaction clearly." Jackson picked up the disbursement record. "It says here the cash was paid directly to Miss Oakley on February 15th. Where was this payment made?" "Here at the bank, according to our records." "What time of day?" Whitmore consulted the document. 2:00 in the afternoon. Sophia felt a rush of vindication. "I was not here at 2:00 on February 15th. That was the day my father collapsed at the store. I spent the entire afternoon and evening at Doc Morrison's office while he tried to stabilize my father's condition. At least a dozen people can verify I was there." The silence that followed was profound. Whitmore's face had gone from red to pale, and he fumbled with the papers on the desk. "Perhaps there was an error in recording the time? Or perhaps someone else collected that money using Miss Oakley's forged signature," Jackson said, "which would make this fraud and theft, not just a disputed loan. Those are criminal matters, Mr. Whitmore, federal crimes if the amounts involved cross certain thresholds." "Now see here," Whitmore blustered. "I will not be accused of criminal activity in my own bank. Thomas Ward processed this loan. If there were irregularities, they would be his responsibility." "Then I would like to speak with Mr. Ward," Sophia said. "He no longer works here. Left the bank's employment about 3 months ago." "How convenient, Jackson observed. "Did he leave a forwarding address?" "I do not believe so. He said something about heading to Chicago for better opportunities." Jackson and Sophia exchanged glances. A forger would certainly leave town once the fraud was complete and before the loan came due. But if Ward had acted alone, why had Whitmore been so defensive and reluctant to show them the documents? "I want copies of everything in this file," Jackson said, "and I want the name and address of anyone else who worked with Ward on processing loans during February of this year." "This is highly irregular," Whitmore protested. "So is foreclosing on someone for a debt they did not incur," Sophia shot back. "Give us the information, Mr. Whitmore, or explain to a federal marshal why you refused." They left the bank an hour later with copies of the documents and a list of 3 other bank employees who had worked with Thomas Ward. Sophia felt energized despite the seriousness of the situation. For the first time since receiving the notice, she felt like she was taking action rather than simply reacting to circumstances beyond her control. "You were remarkable in there," Jackson said as they walked back toward the store. "Most people would have backed down when Whitmore tried to intimidate them." "My father taught me to stand up for myself," Sophia replied. "He said that respect has to be earned, but once earned, it must be defended. I will not let someone steal what he built and sully his name with false debt." Jackson stopped walking, turning to face her with an expression of such unexpected warmth that it made her breath catch. "He raised a strong daughter. He would be proud of how you are handling this." The simple kindness of the words, delivered with such obvious sincerity, broke through the wall of determination Sophia had been maintaining since her father's death. She felt tears prick at her eyes and blinked them back fiercely, unwilling to cry on a public street. "Thank you," she managed. "That means more than you know." They spent the afternoon interviewing the bank employees on Whitmore's list. The first two claimed to know nothing unusual about Ward's work, but the third, a nervous young man named Peter, who handled filing, had a different story. "Ward was always working late," Peter told them in a hushed voice, glancing around the boarding house parlor where they had found him during his lunch break. "Said he was catching up on paperwork, but I saw him practicing signatures one night when he thought everyone had left. Had a whole sheet of paper covered with the same name written over and over in slightly different ways." "Did you see whose name?" Jackson asked. "No, sir. When he realized I was there, he got angry, told me to mind my own business and threatened to get me fired if I mentioned it to anyone." Peter's hands twisted in his lap. "I needed this job. My mother depends on my wages. I know I should have said something, but I was scared." Sophia reached out and touched his arm gently. "You are saying something now, and that takes courage. Do you remember anything else unusual about Ward?" Peter thought for a moment. "He was friendly with Mr. Whitmore's nephew, Charles. I saw them talking privately several times, and once I heard Charles saying something about payments. At the time, I thought he meant loan payments, but now I wonder." "Charles Whitmore works at the bank?" Jackson asked. Jackson read. "No, sir, he runs a saloon and gambling hall down on Shake Rag Street, the Golden Nugget. But he used to work at the bank, a few years back. Left after some kind of disagreement with his uncle." After they left Peter, Jackson and Sophia walked in silence for a while, both processing this new information. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that reminded Sophia of the forge fires from the nearby blacksmith shop. "If Charles Whitmore is involved, this could be bigger than one forged loan," Jackson said finally. "A gambling hall needs cash flow. If he was working with Ward to create fake loans and pocket the money, there might be other victims." "But why target me specifically?" Sophia asked. "There are larger businesses in town, wealthier people." "Your father had just died. You were alone, grieving, distracted. You made an easy target, or so they thought." Jackson's voice hardened. "They did not count on you being strong enough to fight back." They agreed to visit the Golden Nugget that evening, though Sophia insisted on returning home first to change into less conspicuous clothing. Jackson escorted her to the modest house behind the store that she had shared with her father, then headed to his rented room with plans to meet again after dark. Alone in her bedroom, Sophia stared at her reflection in the mirror and tried to recognize the woman looking back at her. 6 months ago, she had been a dutiful daughter helping run the family business and accepting that her life would likely follow a predictable path toward respectable spinsterhood. Now she was planning to investigate a criminal operation with a cowboy investigator she had met only yesterday. And the strangest part was how alive she felt despite the danger. Jackson Ellis had awakened something in her, some combination of courage and recklessness that she had not known she possessed. The way he looked at her, as though she were capable of remarkable things, made her want to prove him right. And beneath that admiration was something else, a crackling tension that made her heart race when their eyes met, a warmth that spread through her chest when he smiled. She changed into a simpler dress in dark green, one that would not stand out in a crowd, and pinned her hair in a looser style that made her look less like a prim shopkeeper. When Jackson knocked on her door an hour later, she saw appreciation flash in his eyes before he schooled his expression to professional neutrality. "Ready?" he asked. "Ready?" she confirmed, and they set off into the gathering darkness. The Golden Nugget occupied a sprawling wooden building that pulsed with noise and light despite the relatively early hour. Piano music competed with loud conversation and laughter, and through the windows Sophia could see men crowded around card tables while women in bright dresses moved through the crowd with trays of drinks. "I should go in alone," Jackson said. "A place like this, a man alone attracts less attention than a man with a respectable woman." "And how will you explain asking questions about Charles Whitmore?" Sophia countered. "No, we need a reason to be here. A story that makes sense. Let me think." She studied the establishment, noting the fancy sign advertising entertainment and fine dining, then smiled. "We are business associates from Chicago considering investing in similar establishments in other Wisconsin towns. We want to meet with successful local operators to discuss their operations." Jackson looked impressed. "That could work. You will need to play the part convincingly." "I have been running a business since I was 16, Sophia said with more confidence than she felt. "I can certainly pretend to run a different kind of business for one evening." Inside, the Golden Nugget was even more overwhelming than it had appeared from outside. The air was thick with cigar smoke and the smell of whiskey, and every surface seemed designed for maximum flash and minimum substance. Gilt mirrors reflected the gaslight, making the room seem larger and more luxurious than it actually was. A woman in a red dress approached them immediately, her professional smile not quite reaching her eyes. "Welcome to the Golden Nugget. Are you here for the gaming tables or the dining room?" "Neither just yet," Jackson said smoothly, slipping into a more refined accent than his usual drawl. "We are hoping to speak with Mr. Charles Whitmore regarding business opportunities. Is he available?" The woman's eyes sharpened with interest as she assessed their clothing and demeanor. "Mr. Whitmore is in his office. May I tell him who is calling?" "Jackson Ellis and Sophia Oakley, investors from Chicago," Sophia said before Jackson could answer, adding a slight haughtiness to her tone that suggested she was accustomed to being taken seriously. The woman led them through the main hall to a door at the rear, knocked twice, and entered when a voice called out permission. Charles Whitmore looked up from a desk covered in papers and cash boxes, and Sophia immediately saw the family resemblance to the bank manager in the shape of his face and the calculation in his eyes. "Mr. Whitmore, these folks are investors from Chicago wanting to discuss business with you," the woman said, then departed with a swish of her skirts. Charles stood, revealing himself to be a tall man in his early 30s with slicked back hair and a suit that was expensive but slightly too flashy to be truly refined. "Always happy to meet fellow entrepreneurs. Please sit. What brings you to Mineral Point?" Jackson and Sophia had rehearsed their story during the walk over, and they delivered it smoothly. They were partners investigating investment opportunities in mining towns throughout Wisconsin and Michigan. They had heard the Golden Nugget was one of the most profitable establishments in Mineral Point and wanted to learn from Charles's success before opening similar ventures elsewhere. Charles preened under their apparent admiration, launching into a detailed explanation of his business model that revealed far more than he probably intended. He talked about profit margins and customer volume, about the importance of extending credit to miners who might not have cash between paydays, about creative financing arrangements that kept money flowing through the establishment. "The key is diversification," he said, pouring whiskey for all of them from a crystal decanter. "Gaming, dining, entertainment, but also lending. Miners need capital to stake claims, buy equipment. Traditional banks are too conservative, too slow. I provide fast cash at reasonable rates, and in return, I get loyal customers and healthy profits." "How do you acquire capital for such lending?" Sophia asked, playing her role of savvy investor. "That requires significant cash reserves." "Various sources," Charles said vaguely. "Private investors, partnerships, creative arrangements with financial institutions?" Jackson leaned forward as if fascinated. "Creative arrangements with banks? How does that work? I thought banks were reluctant to work with gaming establishments." "Officially they are, But unofficially, everyone needs cash flow. For example, if a bank employee can direct certain customers toward faster loan approval through alternative channels, everyone benefits. The customer gets their money quickly, the alternative lender makes a profit, and the bank employee receives a finder's fee for the referral. Clever, Jackson said, though Sophia could hear the edge beneath his admiring tone. Do you have such an arrangement here in Mineral Point? Charles's eyes narrowed slightly, some caution finally penetrating his self-satisfied bragging. Why do you ask? Because we would need to establish similar relationships in any towns where we invest, Sophia said quickly. Understanding the local banking landscape is crucial to our business model. The tension eased slightly. I had an arrangement with someone at Mineral Point Savings and Loan, but he left town a few months ago. Shame, really. He was very good at identifying loan opportunities that the bank itself was too timid to approve. And these loans that the bank rejected, Jackson said carefully, they would go through your lending operation instead? Exactly. Win-win for everyone. Except, Sophia realized with growing anger, that was not what had happened with her loan. The bank had approved a loan she had never applied for, using a forged signature, and then someone had collected the cash. The money had never gone to her, so where had it gone? This former bank employee who left town, she said, keeping her voice casual. Thomas Ward, by any chance? We might know him from Chicago? Charles's expression closed down immediately. I do not recall his name. As I said, he left months ago. Not relevant to current opportunities. They had pushed too hard. Sophia saw Jackson recognize it at the same moment she did. Saw him shift tactics smoothly. Of course, we are more interested in future arrangements anyway. Tell us about your entertainment offerings. I noticed several performers when we came in. The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, but Charles had become guarded, and they learned nothing more of value. When they finally extricated themselves with promises to consider investment opportunities and return with more detailed questions, Sophia felt both frustrated and enlightened. On the street outside, Jackson took her elbow and steered her quickly away from the Golden Nugget, not speaking until they had put several blocks between themselves and the establishment. He definitely knows more than he is saying about Ward, Jackson said, and that explanation about loan referrals is not how it actually works. No legitimate bank would allow employees to steer customers to alternative lenders. That would be a massive conflict of interest. So what do you think really happened? Sophia asked. I think Ward had access to blank loan documents and signatures from his work at the bank. He would create fake loans, forge the signatures of people who seemed like easy targets, then process the loans and take the cash himself. Charles probably helped identify targets, might have provided Ward with information about who had money or assets worth stealing, and took a cut of the profits. But how does Charles get that information if he does not work at the bank anymore? Jackson's expression darkened. His uncle still does. And we saw how defensive Whitmore got when we started asking questions. What if the bank manager is part of the scheme? He would have access to every account, would know exactly who to target for maximum profit and minimum risk of detection. Sophia felt sick. How many people have they done this to? That is what we need to find out. And we need evidence, something concrete that proves the forgery and connects it to Ward, Charles, and possibly Whitmore. Jackson stopped walking and turned to face her. Sophia, this is getting dangerous. These men have stolen potentially thousands of dollars. If they realize we are close to exposing them, they might do more than just threaten your reputation. Are you suggesting I should stop? She asked, hearing the challenge in her own voice. I am suggesting you should know what you are risking. She met his gaze steadily, seeing the concern there, and the respect, and feeling something deeper that made her pulse quicken. I know exactly what I'm risking, and I'm not backing down. These men tried to steal my father's legacy. They are stealing from other people, ruining lives. Someone has to stop them, and if that someone is me, so be it. Jackson smiled, slow and warm and full of admiration that made her heart flutter. Then I guess we need a plan to get proof. They walked back toward Sophia's house, discussing possibilities and strategies. The streets were quiet now. Most honest citizens already home for the evening, and the intimacy of the darkness made Sophia acutely aware of Jackson's presence beside her. She could hear his breathing, feel the warmth radiating from his body, and every accidental brush of his arm against hers sent electric awareness through her nerves. At her door, Jackson paused. "I will start watching Charles tomorrow, see who he meets with, where he goes. If he's worried about what we know, he might contact his partners, and that could give us the evidence we need." "What should I do?" "Go through your father's papers again. Look for anything Ward might have had access to, any documents with your signature or your father's. And talk to other business owners in town quietly. If Charles and Ward have been running this scheme for a while, there might be other victims who have not realized yet that they were targeted." Sophia nodded, then impulsively reached out and touched Jackson's hand. "Thank you for believing me, for helping me. I do not know what I would have done if you had not walked into my store yesterday." Jackson turned his hand to clasp hers, his calloused palm warm against her skin. "I walked into your store because I needed supplies. I stayed because I saw someone worth fighting for." The words hung between them, heavy with meaning and possibility. Sophia felt her breath catch, saw Jackson lean slightly closer, and for a moment she thought he might kiss her right there on her doorstep. Instead, he squeezed her hand gently and stepped back. "Get some rest," he said softly. "Tomorrow is going to be a long day." She watched him disappear into the darkness, then went inside to a house that felt emptier than it had before she met him. That night, she lay awake thinking not just about forgery and fraud, but about blue eyes and calloused hands and the way her name sounded when Jackson said it. The next 3 days passed in a blur of investigation and growing tension. Sophia spoke discreetly with other merchants in town, carefully framing her questions as general interest in business loans rather than specific accusations. What she discovered was chilling. At least 4 other business owners had received loan notices in the past year for debts they claimed they had never incurred. All had been processed by Thomas Ward. All had been too intimidated by the bank's authority to seriously challenge the loans, choosing instead to make payments they could not afford rather than risk foreclosure and ruined reputations. Meanwhile, Jackson shadowed Charles Whitmore, tracking his movements and meetings. On the 3rd night, his patience was rewarded. Charles met his uncle behind the bank well after business hours, and though Jackson could not hear their conversation from his hiding place across the street, he saw Charles hand over what looked like a stack of cash and receive papers in return. "They are still running the scheme," Jackson told Sophia when he came to the store that evening, "and based on the amount of money Charles handed over, I would guess they just processed another fake loan." "We need to catch them in the act," Sophia said, an idea forming in her mind. "What if we set a trap? Give them a target too tempting to resist, but one we control completely." "What do you mean?" "My father had a safe deposit box at the bank that I never closed after he died. It contained some family documents and a small amount of cash, nothing vital. What if I went to the bank tomorrow and made a show of updating my information, filling out new forms with my signature? I could mention loudly that I'm considering expanding the store, that I will need capital soon. If they think I'm a potential legitimate loan customer, one with assets they have already shown they are willing to steal, they might forge another loan application." Jackson frowned, clearly not liking the risk. "If they do that, you will end up with even more fraudulent debt. But we will be watching for it. The moment a new loan appears, we will have proof that they are actively creating forgeries, and this time we will catch them before they can claim I actually signed anything. It is dangerous. If they realize you are setting them up, there's no telling how they might react. It is also our best chance to get evidence that will hold up in court," Sophia argued. "Right now we have suspicions and circumstantial observations. We need something concrete, something even Sheriff Morrison cannot ignore, even if he does play cards with Whitmore every week." Jackson studied her for a long moment, and Sophia could see the conflict in his eyes. He wanted to protect her, wanted to keep her safe from potential danger, but he also respected her too much to make the decision for her. "If we do this, we do it my way," he said finally. "I will be watching the bank constantly. At the first sign that something is wrong, that you are in any danger, we pull back. Agreed?" "Agreed," Sophia said, feeling a rush of affection for this man who had appeared in her life like some kind of avenging angel, and who now looked at her as though she were the bravest person he had ever met. The next morning, Sophia arrived at the bank wearing her finest dress and carrying herself with the confidence of someone planning a major business expansion. She made a point of greeting several other customers loudly, ensuring that multiple people witnessed her presence. At the counter, she requested access to her father's safe deposit box and filled out the required forms with careful, clear signatures. "I'm also considering some changes to the store," she mentioned to the clerk, making sure her voice carried. "Expansion into the empty space next door, updated inventory, perhaps even a mail-order catalog operation. Such ventures require capital, of course, but the potential profits are significant." She saw the clerk's eyes light up with interest and suppressed a satisfied smile. By noon, half the town would know that Sophia Oakley was planning a major business expansion, and by evening that information would certainly reach Charles Whitmore, and probably his uncle as well. For the next week, Sophia and Jackson maintained their trap while conducting more traditional investigation. Jackson spent hours at the land office and courthouse, reviewing property records and loan documents, looking for patterns in Ward's forgeries. Sophia organized the other victims she had identified, helping them compare their forged loan documents to find common elements that would prove systematic fraud rather than isolated incidents. They also spent increasing amounts of time together simply talking, sharing stories about their lives and dreams during long evenings at Sophia's kitchen table. She learned that Jackson had lost his parents to cholera when he was 16, had worked his way west doing whatever jobs he could find, and had developed his investigative skills during 3 years working for a railroad detective agency tracking thieves who preyed on freight shipments. "Why did you leave?" she asked one evening over coffee. "Got tired of taking orders, courier," he said with a wry smile. "And tired of seeing the railroad executives care more about profit margins than justice. They would tell me to solve certain cases and ignore others based on politics and money. I wanted to help people who actually needed it, not just protect the wealthy from minor losses they could easily afford." "Is that what you do now, travel around helping people who need it?" "More or less. I take odd jobs, investigations, sometimes security work. Move when I get restless, stay when something interests me." He met her eyes across the table. "Been thinking about staying in one place for a while, though, if I had a good reason." The unspoken question hung between them, and Sophia felt heat rise in her cheeks. What would count as a good reason? "Someone worth staying for," Jackson said quietly. "Someone brave and smart and beautiful, who makes me want to build something instead of just drifting." Sophia's breath caught. In the warm lamplight of her kitchen, with the curtains drawn against the October chill outside, she felt the weight of everything she had been holding back since they met. The attraction, the admiration, the growing love that she had been afraid to acknowledge because he was helping her, and she did not want to confuse gratitude with deeper emotion. But this was not gratitude. This was something far more profound and terrifying. "I thought I would spend my life alone," she admitted. "After my father died, I assumed I would just run the store, grow old behind that counter, and that would be enough. Then you walked in, and suddenly enough was not enough anymore. You made me want more, want everything." Jackson stood, moving around the table to pull her gently to her feet. His hands were warm on her arms, his eyes searching hers with an intensity that made her tremble. "I have been alone for a long time. Told myself I preferred it that way, that caring about people just meant more ways to get hurt. But you make me want to take that risk. You make me believe that some things are worth fighting for, worth staying for." When he kissed her, it felt like coming home to a place she had never been but always longed for. His lips were gentle at first, almost questioning, and she answered by pressing closer, her hands coming up to rest against his chest where she could feel his heart pounding as hard as her own. The kiss deepened, became more urgent, years of loneliness and longing pouring out in that single connection. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Sophia felt transformed. The practical shopkeeper who had always done what was expected had become someone new, someone capable of passion and risk and choosing her own happiness. "I love you," she said, because the truth deserved to be spoken clearly. "I know it is fast. I know we have only known each other for 2 weeks, but I love you." "I love you too," Jackson replied, his voice rough with emotion. "Have since about the second day, if I'm being honest. Tried to tell myself it was just respect, just admiration for your courage. But it is so much more than that." They held each other in the lamplight, and Sophia felt for the first time since her father's death that the future held promise instead of just obligation. The spell was broken 2 days later when Peter, the nervous bank clerk, came running to the store during his lunch break, his face pale with fear and excitement. "Miss Oakley, Mr. Ellis," he gasped. "I saw something you need to know about. Ward is back in town. I saw him meeting with Charles Whitmore behind the Golden Nugget this morning." Jackson was on his feet instantly. "Are you certain it was Ward?" "Yes, sir. I would recognize him anywhere." "They were arguing about something, and I heard Ward say he needed to finish one more job before he could leave permanently. Charles told him it was too risky, that people were asking questions, but Ward said he needed the money." Sophia and Jackson exchanged grim looks. If Ward was planning one more forgery, it might well be the fake loan application for her store expansion that they had been baiting the trap with. "Peter, I need you to watch the records room at the bank," Jackson said urgently. "If Ward tries to access files or blank loan documents, come tell us immediately. Can you do that?" Peter nodded, scared but determined. "I can try. What are you going to do?" "Catch a forger," Jackson said grimly, "and finally get the proof we need." They spent the rest of that day preparing. Jackson acquired the help of a federal marshal from the regional office in Madison, a stern man named Coleman, who had been very interested in their evidence of systematic banking fraud. Together they set up surveillance on both the bank and the Golden Nugget, waiting for Ward to make his move. It happened the next afternoon. Peter came running with word that Ward had entered the bank through the back door during the lunch hour when most staff were away. Jackson, Marshal Coleman, and Sophia converged on the bank to find Ward at a desk in the records room, carefully copying Sophia's signature from the form she had filled out 2 weeks earlier onto a blank loan application. "Thomas Ward, you are under arrest for forgery and fraud," Marshal Coleman announced, his hand on his sidearm. Ward looked up and Sophia saw panic and calculation flash across his face in quick succession. For a moment she thought he might run, but Jackson had positioned himself blocking the only exit. Ward slumped in defeat, the forged document falling from his nerveless fingers. "I want a deal," Ward said immediately. "I will tell you everything. Testify against everyone involved if I get immunity." Marshal Coleman's smile was thin and cold. "That depends on what you have to tell me." What Ward told them over the next several hours was even worse than they had suspected. For over 2 years, he had been creating fake loans in partnership with Charles Whitmore, and crucially, with the knowledge and participation of bank manager Whitmore. The scheme had netted them over $15,000, stolen from business owners and property holders throughout Mineral Point, who had seemed vulnerable or unlikely to effectively challenge the bank's authority. Sophia's forged loan had been one of the last, created shortly before Ward originally left town with his share of the profits. He had returned because Charles had insisted they needed to create one more big score to cover gambling debts at establishments in Chicago, and Sophia's planned expansion had seemed like the perfect target. The arrests that followed created a scandal that rocked Mineral Point for months. Bank manager Whitmore was charged with fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. Charles Whitmore faced similar charges, plus illegal gambling operation violations. Ward turned state's evidence and received a reduced sentence in exchange for his testimony, but still faced 5 years in prison. For Sophia, the resolution brought vindication and relief. The forged loan against her store was officially vacated, and the bank, under new management brought in by the State Banking Commission, refunded the money that other victims had already paid on their fraudulent loans. More than that, she became something of a local hero, the woman who had stood up to corrupt authority and won. But what mattered most to her was not the public recognition or even the saved store. What mattered was the man who stood beside her through all of it, who had believed in her from the start, and who had chosen to stay in Mineral Point even after the investigation was over. 3 months after the arrests, On a cold January afternoon in 1883, Sophia and Jackson were married in a simple ceremony at the community church. She wore her mother's wedding dress, carefully preserved in a trunk for 25 years, and carried wildflowers that Jackson had somehow acquired despite the winter weather. The entire town attended, it seemed, eager to celebrate the romance that had blossomed from disaster. "I promise to love you, protect you, and stand beside you for all the days of my life," Jackson said during the vows, his voice steady but his eyes bright with emotion. "You made me believe in home again, made me want to build a future instead of just surviving the present. I will never stop being grateful that I walked into your store that day. I promise to love you, challenge you, and share every adventure life brings." Sophia replied, her hands trembling in his. "You taught me to be brave, showed me that I could be more than circumstances dictated. You are my home, my partner, my love." They kissed to thunderous applause, and Sophia felt complete in a way she had never imagined possible. Jackson took over running the security and financial aspects of the store, implementing new bookkeeping systems that protected against fraud and expanded their inventory to include mining equipment and camping supplies for prospectors. His investigative skills proved valuable in vetting new suppliers and detecting attempts at price fixing among wholesale distributors. Together, they transformed Oakley General Store into one of the most successful businesses in southwestern Wisconsin. But more than professional partners, they were true companions. They spent evenings reading together by the fire, discussing everything from politics to poetry. They took walks through the woods, outside town, where Jackson taught her to shoot and she taught him the names of wildflowers. They laughed together, argued passionately about trivial matters, and made love with a tenderness and passion that deepened as the months became years. Their first child, a son they named Samuel Jackson Ellis after Sophia's father, was born in October of 1884. Sophia labored for 12 hours with Jackson holding her hand through every contraction, refusing to leave even when the midwife suggested he might be more comfortable waiting downstairs. When the baby finally emerged, red-faced and screaming, Jackson wept openly. "He is perfect," he whispered, cradling the tiny form with surprising gentleness for such large, work-roughened hands. "You are perfect. I love you so much." 2 years later, a daughter joined them, and they named her Margaret Rose. She had Sophia's auburn hair and Jackson's blue eyes, and from the moment she could toddle, she followed her father everywhere with determined adoration. Samuel, serious and studious even as a toddler, preferred helping his mother in the store, carefully arranging canned goods and practicing his numbers with the inventory lists. Life settled into comfortable rhythms punctuated by small excitements. The store continued to prosper. Jackson took on occasional investigative work for the county, always with Sophia's approval and always with the understanding that his family came first. They added a second story to their house, creating more room for the growing children and a proper office where Sophia could manage the store's expanding mail order business. In the summer of 1890, when Samuel was 5 and Margaret 3, they took a family trip to Chicago, staying in a real hotel and visiting museums and parks. Sophia watched Jackson show their children the city sights and felt overwhelming gratitude for how completely their lives had intertwined and flourished. "Did you ever imagine this?" she asked him one evening as they watched the children play in the hotel's courtyard. "When you were drifting from place to place, did you imagine having this?" "Not in my wildest dreams," Jackson admitted. "I thought I was too restless, too damaged by everything I had lost. Then I met a stubborn woman with fire in her eyes who refused to let injustice stand, and everything changed. You gave me a reason to stop running, Sophia. You and the children are everything I never knew I needed." "You saved me," Sophia said softly, "not just from the forgery, though that too. You saved me from a half-life of just existing. You showed me what it means to truly live, to take risks, to reach for happiness, instead of just accepting what seems safe." They kissed while their children played nearby, still as much in love as they had been that first evening in Sophia's kitchen when they had admitted their feelings. As the years passed, they watched Mineral Point evolve. The mining boom eventually faded, replaced by dairy farming and small manufacturing. The store adapted with the times, and Jackson's reputation as an honest investigator brought steady work arbitrating disputes and investigating theft. They became pillars of the community, respected not just for their business success, but for their integrity and willingness to help others. Samuel grew into a thoughtful young man who studied law, determined to fight injustice through the courts. Margaret became a teacher working at the local school and showing particular passion for helping children who struggled with reading. Both children grew up hearing the story of how their parents met, of forgery and investigation, and standing up to corruption, and both internalized the lesson that doing what was right mattered more than doing what was easy. On their 20th wedding anniversary in 1903, Jackson surprised Sophia with a trip to the place where it had all started. The building that had housed the Golden Nugget was now a respectable boarding house. The bank, under honest management for 2 decades, had become a cornerstone of community trust. They walked the streets hand in hand, remembering the fear and excitement of those early days. "Do you have any regrets?" Jackson asked, as they stood outside what was now a thriving general store still bearing the Oakley name, though Samuel was being trained to eventually take it over. "Not a single one," Sophia said firmly. "Every hardship led us here. Every challenge made us stronger. I would not change anything, because changing anything might mean losing what we have." "I love you," Jackson said, the words as meaningful at 50 as they had been at 30. "Every single day I wake up grateful that I walked into your store when I did." "I love you too," Sophia replied. "My cowboy investigator, my partner, my heart." They continued walking through the town that had witnessed their love story, surrounded by the life they had built together from ashes and adversity. Behind them, their children ran the store with the same integrity their parents had modeled. Around them, a community thrived in part because 2 people had refused to accept injustice and had found love in the process. As the sun set over Mineral Point that anniversary evening, painting the Wisconsin sky in shades of amber and rose, Sophia and Jackson Ellis stood together on their porch, watching their grandchildren play in the yard. Margaret had married a teacher from Madison and had 3 children of her own. Samuel had wed a lawyer he met in Milwaukee and had 2 daughters who already showed signs of their grandmother's stubbornness and their grandfather's determination. "A good life," Jackson said, his arm around Sophia's waist in the familiar gesture that had comforted and connected them through 2 decades. "The best life," Sophia agreed, "better than I could have dreamed." They had started with a forged signature and a desperate need for justice. They had found love, built a family, created a legacy. The cowboy who had traced forgery to its source had found a home. The woman who had refused to accept false debt had claimed true riches. Together, they had written a story better than any fiction, a testament to courage, love, and the unshakable belief that truth and justice would prevail. As darkness fell and they went inside to join their family for dinner, Sophia looked back one more time at the store in the distance, at the town that had tested and rewarded them, at the life they had carved from nothing but determination and love. She smiled, squeezed Jackson's hand, and stepped into the warmth of their home, surrounded by the laughter and love of children and grandchildren, living proof that sometimes the best stories begin with injustice and end with joy. Their love story had been forged in crisis and proved through challenge. It had grown through years of partnership and deepened with each shared trial and triumph. And as they sat down to dinner that night, surrounded by family and filled with contentment, both knew with absolute certainty that they had found exactly what they were meant to find: each other, a life of meaning, and a love that would endure beyond their years into the memories and values they passed to future generations. The forgery had been traced. The criminals had been caught. Justice had been served. But more importantly, 2 lonely people had found each other in the midst of chaos and had built something beautiful and lasting. That was the real victory. the true happy ending, the legacy that mattered most. Years later, when their great-grandchildren asked about the old days in Mineral Point, about how great-grandma Sophia and great-grandpa Jackson had met, the family would tell the story with pride. They would talk about the forged loan and the brave investigation, about standing up to powerful men and refusing to accept injustice. But mostly, they would talk about love, about two people who had found each other against all odds and had built a life together that blessed everyone it touched. And in that story, in that legacy, Sophia and Jackson Ellis lived forever, their love proving that sometimes the greatest adventures begin with the worst circumstances and the finest futures are built on foundations of courage, integrity, and the willingness to fight for what matters most.